Hi, Don Cantor here, sharing a bonus episode. It's from a podcast called Shtark Tank. Shtark Tank is a podcast about the challenges and opportunities of living a committed Jewish life in the workforce. This episode features Rabbi Rafi Dembovsky, who discusses the tension between the desire to live a life 100% devoted to learning Torah and his journey, as well as the book he wrote, which led him to conclude that the proper path for him is a life of Torah im Derech Eretz. Enjoy.
My understanding was that what was behind it was an attempt to silence me. And I think my first reaction was to cry. My second reaction was to sit down and to think through the points and to read through the sefer and to see, are they fair points? My in-laws are very Derech Eretz family, and they have, all of the sefer of Hirsch on the bookshelf, and there was always something pulling me towards them. And once I started learning 19 letters 4 times to actually understand what was being said, but once I started doing that and I was exposed to these big ideas, and I started to look into things and look into sugyas, and I'm thinking, like, where is this manifest? And it's a job. It's a job to try to separate, to untangle the hashkafic sugyas and halachic sugyas with what's actually happening in society. I learned in Kollel in London, and we did feel a little bit of, tension, antagonism from people in London who didn't necessarily appreciate what we were doing. I was once at a Shabbos table and we all went around explaining what we were doing. I said I was in Kollel, and at some point during the meal somebody said, "Oh, don't even get me started on Kollel." And didn't feel so great after that.
Shalom Aleichem, and welcome to Shtark Tank. Shtark Tank is a podcast about the challenges and opportunities of being a Ben Torah in the workforce. This week, we're joined by my dear friend, Rabbi Rafi Dembovsky, who just published a very important sefer right on this topic. So I'm really excited to have you here and talk about the new sefer. So first of all, mazel tov and welcome, and thank you for coming.
Thank you, Yaakov. Thank you very much for the opportunity. And I'd like to take the opportunity now to thank you for your incredible podcast that's given me, and I'm sure so many other people, much chizuk over the years.
Thank you. So we actually connected very early on. You discovered the podcast through a mutual friend. I think it was Josh Sinclair.
Could be.
So give shout out to Josh. So before we jump into the conversation, a quick reminder to please hit the subscribe button and leave a 5-star review. It really helps us grow the show and reach new listeners. So thank you so much for that. So here's the book. It's called Between Torah and Derech Eretz, V'amech Kulam Tzadikim, about a hashkafic and halachic analysis of the Torah in Derech Eretz and Torah-only viewpoints. It's about Torah in a narrow sense, Torah in a broad sense, Torah and working, Torah and business, so many crucial topics that we talk about so much. And I want to actually start by setting up the conversation. The book is very well researched and it's very scholarly in the best possible way, makoros and analysis and understandings. But I want to sort of set up and say that to me, this book is really about your journey to try to find your place in the world as an Eved Hashem. So I just want to understand, do you accept that formulation? And if so, we'll try to track your journey and the book's journey sort of together.
Yeah, 100%. The book came from a place of searching, of trying to understand what exactly is my place in Avodas Hashem, what exactly is my journey, where do I fit into the different societies around me, and that's where I came from.
Exactly. Okay, so perfect. So let's start just a little personal background. Tell me about where you grew up and what life was like for you as a child.
So I grew up in London, in Edgware specifically. I don't think I'm the first Edgwarean on the podcast. And I grew up in what I would call like a lived Torah im Derech Eretz experience, meaning to say my parents worked, everyone around me worked, nobody was learning full-time in Kollel necessarily. But despite that, I felt that the hashkafa that I was internalizing was a Torah-only hashkafa, meaning with a strong primacy on Talmud Torah. So I grew up in, like I said, in Edgware. I went to Hasmonean High School, famous school. The slogan is actually Torah im Derech Eretz. After Hasmonean, I went to Yeshiva, to Toras Moshe, to Tomo. I was then a year back in London after I got married. So I was learning in Kollel in London, and then came back to Eretz Yisrael. I learned in Kollel, I think, for 7 years. And then this year...
So I want to stop you right there, and we'll leave that next year in suspense because we get that in a second. But, you mentioned that even growing up, there was a Torah in Derech reality, but a certain hashkafa and a certain chinuch that you were receiving or picking up on that was a little bit different. So can you just explain a little more what that means?
Yeah, so like I said, the lived experience was Torah im Derech Eretz. There was a strong emphasis on working, on making a parnasa for your family. There was a strong emphasis on excellence in secular studies, academic achievements. well-respected people in the community were not just Rabbanim. Obviously, Rabbanim were extremely well-respected in the community, but also the doctors, the teachers, the businessmen were well-respected. Professionalism was well-respected. But I do feel that the hashkafa that I internalized, and it could be that I heard other things and it didn't speak to me at the time, the hashkafa was Torah-only, and I didn't really have words to explain, to maybe even justify the focus on professionalism and the concept of working together with Torah learning. I guess from a young age, maybe I might have understood within myself that there was a bit of a tension and that really we should be, learning all day, and anything else that we're doing is perhaps b'di'evet.
I guess the question is, maybe one way to frame it is that we obviously, most of us in wonderful, healthy families, look up to our parents as role models, but don't necessarily view them, articulate this as like they're our spiritual guides. And our spiritual guidance is usually coming from our machanchim and our rabbis and the Rav of the Kehila. And those are usually people who their personal experience is they're basically Anshe Kodesh from the time they were young, and they learn Yeshiva, and they're in Kollel, and they start to teach. So is that what you're referring to? That people who are, you're looking up to in the beginning of, in the front of the classroom are people who really have never left the base medrash, and maybe saying the way they say things, or just their lived experience that you're looking up to and taking note of is Torah-only? Is that?
Yeah, I believe so. I had many tremendous Rabbanim and rebbeim who I still learn from today, and I think they were products of what we would call Torah-only institutions, Yeshivas, and the hashkafa that I internalized from them was very much Torah-only. And again, it could be that that things were broader, which I did not internalize myself. But yeah, that's exactly the point.
I think it's a very profound point that I also think about a lot, that the hashkafa that we end up with is not only a product of what's being said, but what sticks. And it could be that, even thinking back to my own journey, certain things that I heard at the time, Shana Shana Bet, I'm like, at the time I remember thinking like, what is he, crazy? Like, certain Rebbe who was very into like, you should get ready for a career and working. At the time I was like, what are you talking about? Like, I'm going to learn my whole life. Like, I had no plans of working when I was in Shana Aleph. It's not on my mind. And this hashkafa, it wasn't sticking at the time. Now I go back and I realize he was talking about it all the time, and I just wasn't necessarily ready to listen at the time. So, you mentioned that you learned in Hasmo, which has a slogan of Torah in Derech Eretz.
Yeah.
But then you went to another yeshiva, which doesn't have the same slogan. So tell us a little about that experience, why you chose to go to Tomo, what it was like there. Maybe tell us a little about some of the rebbeim there who have some very fascinating life stories. And, Rabbi Mazelman went to Maimoni school with my grandfather in Boston. He's obviously a tremendous Talmid Chacham who I have great respect for. So tell a little bit about your decision to go there and your experience there.
So I'll take one step back before talking about the yeshiva. When I was 16, I went on a youth trip to Israel, and a week before the trip started, we had like a yeshiva trip, and we went around we learned in the Mir, and we visited different places. One of the places we visited was Bnei Brak, and we were taken to the homes of the Gedolim in Bnei Brak, and it made a tremendous impact on me. I remember one of the Gedolim, I forget who it was, giving personal brachas to each. We were very much medaik in the brachas, and he said to one person, you should be zocher to be matzliach in limudei kodesh and limudei chol, and he said to me to be matzliach in limudei kodesh. So I took that as a sign. This is what I want. This I want to do. And the madruchim on that trip were all bachrim in yeshiva, fired up, sharing Torah ideas and inspiration. I thought, this is where my heart is, so I want to do. So I came to Toras Moshe and I threw myself all in, and I loved it. I loved the learning. Like you said, the Rosh Yeshiva is a fascinating person. He's a tremendous Talmid Chacham, nephew of Rabbi Yishmael Soloveitchik. He himself, I think, was a professor in MIT, but he's very much a Torah-only ideology. He's famous for his embedding within his Talmidim the concept of single-minded focus on Talmud Torah. Another one of my rebbeim who was very close to, Rav Shirkin, he came from a slightly different background, more yeshivish background in America. He found his way to Rav Yosheva's shiurim and never left, I guess. But also a hashkafa very much of Torah only. And the grandson of Rav Yoshev was Rav Moshe Twersky, who was killed a couple of months into my first year. And the children of Rav Meiserman and the son of Rav Twersky, they're continuing the yeshiva. So despite the fact that they want to turn their Talmidim into B'nai Torah, whatever they're doing, but essentially the hashkafa is very much a Torah only.
And so you're at this point now where you're learning and you're really all in on this world of Torah. But it's also a time of life where people are often, getting ready for universities. Tell us what that meant for you, and did that cause any, tension or any debates within yourself and your family? On the one hand, the time of life where many are getting ready for careers, and on the other hand, this ideology which says you should really be learning as much as possible.
Yeah, so during school, I'd prepared myself for a career in medicine. I'd taken the A-levels, the sciences that were necessary. I think that internally I'd given up on that by the time I went to Yeshiva. Um, but my parents were very much still hoping, I think, that I would become that doctor. Um, Not because they didn't value learning, just that was the plan. So they would often ask me, when am I coming back? When am I going to be studying in university? And I started to tell them that no, that's not what I want to do. I want to continue learning. And we had a lot of conversations. It was difficult because this was something entirely new to them, and my parents are extremely supportive people, extremely supportive of my choices, and we had to talk it through and see how it could work, whether it could work. And eventually we worked it out, and they realized that I really had my heart set on this, and they came to support me, to support that choice.
So I think it's a fascinating dynamic, and I think needs to be further unpacked at length a different time. The parents, yeshiva, bachur, rebbeim triangle is a very important one, and I've a lot to talk about there. But I think just on a practical level, like what was the alternative? Like what were you looking at around you that was the alternate path that you were considering at the time?
The alternative path, as in to stay in Kollel.
Right.
Right, as in I saw lots of people who stayed on in the yeshiva and who got married. Some of them got married to girls from Israel, and they set up their lives in Eretz Yisrael to never go back. Some of them to girls from the UK or America, and they made that decision to come. But I saw that they were doing it. People were doing it. People were staying and learning. What the end goal was, it wasn't. First of all, there wasn't necessarily an end goal. Meaning, the end goal is the learning. That's what we're doing. How do people make money? Some of them took jobs in yeshivas, sholem eshiv, rebbeim, but there was never really a clear path. And actually, that was quite a difficult thing for me to process, and my parents also to process. You want to be a doctor, you go to medical school, and the path is set up for you. You want to be a rebbe in yeshiva, it's not so clear what you need to do.
Right.
So that was something that my parents were worried about, and I guess I think I was hiding from it a little bit, because I just saw everybody else doing it, and I thought I could do it myself as well.
Yeah, I mean, peer pressure is such a powerful force, and so you're looking around and you're seeing people that they seem to be doing fine, and they're all in and they're learning and they're married. So looking back at it now, a little more life experience. Do you think that were you a little bit young and naive at the time? Like, what have you learned more about that path now that you were a little bit farther along?
Yeah, I think I was a bit young and naive. I think firstly, I was seeing people who were a year or two into their marriage, one kid, two kids without tremendous expenses. So things are easier at that stage. And I wasn't necessarily privy to what was going on behind closed doors and the stress that can cause, a lifestyle like that can cause on the wife, who potentially has to work from morning until evening to bring the money in. And then the husband as well, who then has to pick up the pieces at home and take the kids from one place to the next. He's the one who has to stay home if the kid's not feeling well. And it does create a different dynamic to what I was necessarily seeing in the base medrash. And as I've grown older and I spent many years in Kollel, you start to realize that most people are not just sitting and learning the entire day. A lot of people have jobs on the side. People are working in early in the evening, or they have a job afternoon and they're learning morning cheder. It's not quite what I saw in yeshiva, what I thought I saw in yeshiva anyways.
So you ended up getting married, and then you started out in Kollel, as you mentioned. So tell us what some of those next stages were for you in life. And then also at that point, the pandemic hit not long after. So maybe tell us about that sort of early marriage stage for you.
So I got married in 2018 to somebody from a very Yakish Derech Eretz family. But at that stage, all of the kids were still in learning. We spent a year in London. My wife was studying in university, so I learned in Kollel in London. And we did feel a little bit of, I guess, tension, antagonism from people in London who didn't necessarily appreciate what we were doing. I was once at a Shabbos table and we all went around explaining what we were doing. I said I was in Kollel, and at some point during the meal, somebody said, "Oh, don't even get me started on Kollel." And wow, didn't feel so great after that. Anyways, we then moved back to Eretz Yisrael after that year was up, and spent a little bit of time in Tomo after we came back, and then found different Kollelim, and I was in Kollel for 7 years.
Wow. So you're doing a lot of learning. So at what point did the ideas around this book start to come out? When did you start to take more seriously the study and the focus and the research that went into this book?
So firstly, like I said, my in-laws are very Derech Eretz family, and they have, all of the sefer of Hirsch on the bookshelf, and there was always something pulling me towards them. I felt like I should try to read them, but I'd always pick up the older Chumash, the blue one, and open it. I can't read it. I'm not sure what it's saying. But there was that kind of attractive books on the bookshelf. During our time in Eretz Yisrael, there were things which started to raise questions within me whether the Torah-only ideology was necessarily the one that resonated within me most. I guess one of them was during Corona, when there was a little bit of a tension between, I guess,
Torah, Chazal, and science.
Exactly, between Torah, Chazal, and science. And
Tino didn't get that joke after.
and I felt that the way that I'd been raised to value science was not necessarily being seen within the communities that I was within. And then I guess really the biggest difficulty was schooling for my son. We didn't want to send him to a cheder where there would be limited, if any, limudei chol. We wanted to give him a strong, robust chol education without sacrificing on the Torah education. We wanted to give him the option of, if he wants to stay in learning, great, and if he wants to work or study, then great as well. And we didn't really find any of them within the communities that we lived in, and we found that very difficult. So we went to speak to different rebbeim. I think I spoke to 5-6 different people and asked them their opinions on the new, I guess, Haredi, Mamlachti Haredi kind of schools where they try to mix limudei kodesh and limudei chol, and I did not get good responses from most of them. Some of them said that it's Eretz Yisrael, we're trying to do something different, something higher. Some of them, I guess, called into question the ulterior motives of the people that had started such schools, and knowing people that were involved in these kind of ventures, that didn't sit with me.
I just want to jump in because I think this is around the same time that I started Shtark Tank and you discovered it, and we connected. And I remember in our first conversation feeling a real sense of, what's the right word? Part of it is admiration, and a part of it is pity that you're at the time 26-ish years old. Your little son is a cute little boy, and here you are thrown into this very, very intense question, which in a certain sense is going to decide a lot about your family's future, his future. And I'm just wondering, did you think about it that way? Did it feel very heavy at the time?
Yeah, it did. It really did. I mean, that was, I guess, one of the main reasons we moved from Yerushalayim to Ramat Beit Shemesh was because there were more options for, I guess, a middle route, chutnik type school within a yeshivish community, which was what we were really looking for. So we didn't find that in Yerushalayim. So we moved to Ramat Beit Shemesh. So, we did make big choices based upon this, this question, this difficulty. Ultimately, we found one of the rebbeim that we spoke to was Rabbi Rafi, and he was highly encouraging of us to pursue the school that we wanted. And it was at that time I remember having a conversation with somebody, and I was saying, I think that the term Derech Eretz ideology is dominant in Kollel Yisrael, and we're kind of seeing something a little bit different in a little bubble in Eretz Yisrael. And he challenged me, and I remember thinking, like, I wish I had facts to back up what I'm saying. And I started looking into the sugyas, and I started with the Gemara and Berachot, the Machlukas, Rabbi Yishmael, and that's how the sefer was born. Trying to work out for myself, what are the facts. I didn't really go into the empirical facts of it. I didn't really check out, how many people are doing what, but what are the halachic facts? What are the hashkafic facts? And that's where the idea of this sefer was born.
So it's very interesting because you're talking about communities, and there's a very strong social element to Kollel Yisrael, and it's wonderful. And then there's hashkafa, and there's sources and facts, as you say. And for me also, the discovery that there's so much more nuance and such a different outlook on things if you just open the books versus if you look at things from a societal, communal perspective. Is that something that also came as a surprise to you?
Yeah. I guess once I started reading, my journey with Rav Hirsch came from 19 letters. And once I started learning 19 letters, I mean, 4 times to actually understand what was being said. But once I started doing that and I was exposed to these big ideas, and I started to look into things and look into the sugyas, and I'm thinking, like, where is this manifest? And it's a job. It's a job to try to separate, to untangle the hashkafic sugyas and halachic sugyas with what's actually happening in society. And often there are very good reasons, historically sound reasons, for why there are such differences. But it was a difficulty and something which I had to consciously work out.
It's also very interesting because you were taking almost a base medrash approach to a real world problem, which is something that I think, in Shtark Tank also has been like a interesting journey for me. Because like on the one hand, you could open up books from here until tomorrow, but speaking to actual people, you get a different sense. And so, a yeshiva mentality might say, because they're just balabatim and they don't actually learn enough. So that's why what they're saying doesn't stick with what it says in the book. The other approach says, no, Torah is Toras Chaim, and it's expressed in the world in different ways. And to whatever extent you're able to express the words of Torah is the real or is a genuine reality. And if you're only able to learn up a sugya in a book, but it's not actually livable, then there's a chisar in there. Is that how you see it?
To a certain, I don't know, I guess I have it somewhere in the middle, I guess is where I would find myself, that, Torah ideas might be, authentic Torah ideas and still relevant and important to bring back into the discussion, even if societally we've moved away from them. Because there are many reasons why societally we move away from certain positions. And I think it's always important to go back to the sugyas and see, where is the disconnect? Why did that disconnect happen? And is there reason to continue that disconnect? Or should we maybe try to look back and bridge the gap between the two?
Mm-hmm. So that's very interesting. So you start going down these rabbit holes. You start learning and researching and gathering and writing. And at a certain point, you decide to publish this as a book, or to aim to publish as a book. So tell us about that process. What were some of the challenges that you encountered when you decided that this book, this exploration of Tarim Derech Eretz versus Torah-only, should be gathered and published and shared with the world?
So firstly, I've always wanted to write a book, and I actually did try on 3 different topics before this one, but they just didn't lead anywhere. So that was always in the back of my mind. I'd like to write something, but I really felt that this one was going somewhere from the beginning. Once I started, from the very first sugya, the first sugya led to the second sugya, led to the third sugya, and then I developed it into 2 parts, the hashkafic part, the halachic part. And I felt like, wow, I can do this. It's been a life dream. So that's why I really invested so much effort into turning it into a book.
And maybe just for the listeners, you said like sugyas lead to sugyas. So what are some of the main sugyas that you ended up really getting into in the book?
So the very first sugya that I started with, like I said, is Rabbi Yishmael and Berachot, which is, potentially a sugya about the mitzvah of Talmud Torah. It's potentially also a different sugya about what exactly does Hashem want for, an individual to be pursuing in their life.
Rosh also spoke about it when we talked about him.
Exactly.
And you can go back and check out that episode.
Yes. I take a similar approach in the sefer to Rabbi Weiss. Not that he needs my haskamot at all. So anyways, that was one big sugya, though, the mitzvah of the cheder of the mitzvah of Talmud Torah, how exactly to fulfill it, what does it require? Other sugyas halachically included things like whether it's permissible or not to take money for learning Torah. I guess, the concept of the stipend, the Kollel stipend. Secular studies, it's permissible or is not permissible to learn secular studies. And hishtadlus, it's also a halachic sugya, although it's very much influenced by hashkafa, by machshava, but that was also those are some of the halachic sugyas that I investigated. The first half of the sefer, however, is much more of an attempt to draw from the sugyas the principles of Torah Derech Eretz and Torah-only. I tried to demonstrate that there are actually 2 authentic, competing ways of looking at Judaism, and to demonstrate how they developed into the Torah Derech Eretz and Torah-only approaches that we know of nowadays.
I think some would say, this idea of Torah-only, as much as it has its roots in old sources, on a practical level, it's very, very modern, and it's a result of great wealth in our community, because normally, you need parnasa, you need to put food on the table, and Torah-only, doesn't really have a good answer for that. Today, in a very wonderful turn of events, we're able to fund Kollel en masse. So is that a fair assessment or a fair representation of the sugya?
Yeah, it's a good point, and I think that one of the chidushim, I guess, I tried to put forward in the sefer is that Torah Derech Eretz and Torah-only are not necessarily about your choices, your practical choices. It's much more of a mindset. Whereas Torah in Derech Eretz takes an active approach to Judaism. The ikka is what we do. Torah-only takes a much more internal, potentially intellectual approach to Judaism. The ikka is what we know. And I try to demonstrate where those are drawn from the sugyas, how different Rishonim approach this machlokas, and it really was a huge machlokas at its time. What is the tachlis of Judaism? You have the Rambam writing the ikka mitzvah is Yedias Hashem, and you have others who were cholik and said no, the ikka is the mitzvah. What you do, mitzvahs maisias.
Interesting, because the Rambam is also the one that many people hold up as a champion of not getting any money for Torah, and there has to be malacha.
Exactly. So that is one of the points I'm making in the Hakdama, that I don't think necessarily all sugyas are related, meaning somebody could be a very much Torah-only mindset, but they might hold that halachically a person has to work. The ik is how you view your work. Are you viewing your work as essentially a distraction from the ikka avoda, which is, some sort of Yedias Hashem, whether that's through Talmud Torah or Kabbalah or science, according to the Rambam, or whether you view your work as an opportunity to give back to the world, to build society, in the words of Rav Hirsch, to practice tzedek and mishpat. So, like you said, the Rambam was totally against taking money for learning Torah, but his approach to me was a very Torah-only approach, a very intellectual, internal approach to Judaism.
And so then you're ready to publish. What were some of the things that were interesting or surprising or challenging about that step of actually getting the sefer out into the world?
So Baruch Hashem, Mosaica Press were very happy to take on the sefer. And so from that perspective, I was in. But then you have big challenges. I think the biggest challenge for me was the haskamot. I knew that would be an issue. I knew that people, Rabbanim, see this sugya as potentially controversial, whatever. And I knew haskamot would be difficult. So I think there were three categories of difficulty I experienced in getting haskamot. There were some Rabbanim who just didn't have the time to read it, which I appreciate, because there are a tremendous number of people writing seforim. They can't give haskamot. They can't read every sefer that comes onto their table. And then some were very gracious and said, I'm looking at the sefer and I appreciate the tremendous amount of work that went into it, but I'm sorry, I can't read it. Then there were those who said that they were tremendously supportive, and they read the sefer and they gave me feedback, and the type of feedback that you would normally have in a michtav bracha in haskama, but I wasn't allowed to publish it. One of them said he didn't feel right. There were two tremendous Talmidei Chachamim who I had this reaction from. One of them said he thought it was a great sefer. He read it from cover to cover, but he just didn't feel right endorsing it. Another one had lots to say about it and thought it was an extremely important sefer, and it was did a good job of analyzing sugyas which need to be analyzed. But he felt that unless he could read every single line and be able to vouch for every single line, he wouldn't be able to write haskamah for me. So I guess I call those my unofficial haskamahs. And then I had those, well, it was only one who gave me negative feedback. And I took it quite hard, actually. I sent the sefer to somebody who I thought would be supportive, and I received a 4-point email as to why the sefer should not be published, including it's not edited enough, which, it was fair enough. It wasn't yet ready for publication. The Nefesh HaChaim has already dealt with the machlokes between Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Rav Schwab has already done what you're trying to do in his Kunturas Elu Ve'elu, which, agav, it was one of the inspirations for the sefer. And what was number 4? I can't remember number 4 at the moment. Either way, I took that very...
He wasn't saying that the book was apikorsos. He was just saying for various more technical reasons, it's not necessary.
Yes, but my understanding was that what was behind it was an attempt to silence me. And I think my first reaction was to cry. My second reaction was to sit down and to think through the points and to read through the sefer and to see, are they fair points? The final point was he thought it was not a fair representation of the two approaches, that I was heavily biased towards, and I should present the sefer as a defense of Derech Eretz if that's what I want to do. So I read through the sefer, I read through the comments, and I responded to him, and I said, please, I'd love constructive criticism. Would you be able to help me understand what exactly you mean by this? The Nefesh HaChaim, I quote him, I discuss him. Rav Schwab's sefer, Rav Schwab's Kunturas was the inspiration, but it's completely different. And he emailed me back saying, I've said what I had to say. So I think I spoke to other people, and my feeling was that it wasn't kedai to worry too much about that.
So we're running a little short on time, but I think on that last point, the feedback that you're getting, I think a lot of people have this question of, we're taught that Torah is Toras emes, and that's one of the prime values in Torah. And then you have gedolim, bona fide gedolim, who are basically saying, for reasons, that the emes is that your sefer is good and should be published, but.
Yeah.
And to say emes but is a challenging thing. Did you find, how do you think about this? And maybe I'll share my sort of approach, is that I think that maybe, a young fiery Yeshiva bachur maybe has a little bit of an extreme understanding what emes is, but really shalom is a very interesting word which I can share another time. But gadol hashalom, and maybe to thing that will create massive machlokesim or tensions. Will is just better to avoid.
Yeah, that's a very nice way of looking at it, and I appreciate that. I called the sefer initially Va'amech Kulam Tzadikim because that is the attempt to demonstrate the authenticity and the validity of both approaches. I do not at all want to create machlokes, controversy.
It's good for ratings.
On the contrary, I want to create understanding and achdus. I guess the way that I looked at it was a bit more pragmatic. That at the end of the day, these rabbanim have tremendous reputations, and they currently are able to be mashpia on Klal Yisrael in ways which they wouldn't if they would get into trouble theoretically with a sefer that wouldn't be niskabel by somebody else. So I don't have tiners on them. Maybe in terms of the greater good for Klal Yisrael, what they did was 100% right. And some of them do continue to try to push a little bit more of an openness towards term Derech Eretz. But they do that in small bursts. Someone like me, I guess I don't have that reputation yet. It's Hashem one day, so I was able to put out the sefer without that worry.
So we're really short on time. So a few more quick thoughts. You published this sefer. You were how old?
I think I started writing it 3 years ago. Now I'm 30.
And
It's
being
out.
so young, being a published author, that's something that was like imposter syndrome.
A little bit. I'm constantly thinking, did I include everything that I needed to include, should have included? The answer is, of course not. As in, Torah is massive. I'm not trying to create an exhaustive sefer on the topic. I just want to bring the topic back into conversation, and I hope that I have included enough to make the point that I'm trying to make. But I'd love to continue to add to the sefer, and if people have feedback and we can create a revised edition, Torah is endless.
Right. And finally, you mentioned that you started out, you were in Kollel, you had these dreams of staying learning. You started having questions and debates about how to approach your son's chinuch and your family's derech. And then recently you made a big decision about your own personal career. So maybe you can tell us about that and to what extent it was influenced by the work on the book.
Yeah. So after working through the sefer and realizing that the lived experience that I had at home, the term Derech Eretz experience, is also the hashkafic approach that resonates within me most, and which I personally feel most convinced by. So I was starting to think about how to move forward into the world of action, how to be mashpia on the greater world. There were other reasons as well. The timing was right, and I took the step. I'm still in Kollel as much as I can, but I'm also studying law in Hebrew University, and I don't know exactly what the end goal is, but I would really like to be mashpia on Klal Yisrael in Eretz Yisrael as much as I can. I think there's a lot of work to do, and we're very far. And there's lots of positive steps towards bringing, the love of Hashem into greater society in Eretz Yisrael, but that's something that I'd love to work towards as well.
Do you view yourself as having switched over from Torah-only to Derech Eretz?
To a certain extent, yes, because I was all in the Torah-only Yeshiva, but in another extent, no, as in there was always that experience from home and the people that I witnessed growing up, who were successful businessmen, but tremendous Talmidei Chachamim, and it was always somewhere in me. At the end of the day, it's all one system of avodas Hashem, and people go through different times in their lives, and sometimes in one's life, the Torah-only approach is correct, and at other times, the Derech Eretz approach is correct. Essentially, they're both authentic, and a person has to make the decision at different points in their life of what's right for them.
It's very beautiful. Mazel tov. It's a very special sefer. We will include links in the show notes. Let's do a really quick rapid fire round. 3 short questions, 3 hopefully short answers. We're in the summer. We have nice long Shabbos afternoons. What do you like to do at that time?
So if I'm not spending time with the family, which is very important, or sleeping, which is also important, I like to learn seforim that, for whatever reason, I don't normally get to learn in the base medrash. With Soloveitchik's seforim, currently reading with Herzog's collected writing, with Hirsch's collected writings. That's what I like to do.
Okay, and what's your favorite sefer on Parshat Shavua?
This has also been a bit of a journey for me. At one point, when I was in Yeshiva, it was the Beis Halevi. Currently, obviously, it's with Hirsch.
That's a little classic. And so finally, if you were forced to quit law school, leave Kollel, find some other job, some other position, I guess you sort of mentioned this before, but you can also surprise us with a career of your choice and maybe you dream of doing as a kid, what would that be?
So something from left field completely. I'd love to be a guitarist.
Okay, still a lot of time. I'm sure you'll put out some great gunim when the time comes. Rafi, thank you so much for coming and joining us today.
Thank you, Yaakov.
All right.